Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod, where we amplify voices from across the industry, aggregate perspectives, and elevate our collective thinking around strategy execution in agribusiness. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and I appreciate you choosing to spend your time with us today. Now, a real quick reminder before we get started to like and subscribe to this program wherever you get your podcasts. You can do it right now. It's the best way to make sure you never miss an episode. And at the end of today's discussion, if you're so inclined, we would love it if you consider leaving us a review and letting us know how we're doing. In my line of work, partnering with and advising the executive teams and boards of directors of privately held and cooperatively owned agribusinesses, I am really the beneficiary and have a great privilege of being an observer to the way that work gets done within these agribusinesses, the way that strategies are formed, the ways priorities are communicated, and where things either excel or can stall out in the process. And because of the multi-organizational exposure this affords me, I also get to see where recurring pain points show up across companies, across geographies, across seasons and sectors. Some of these observations and ideas actually develop around them, become part of our services that we provide to our clients. Some things I choose to keep an eye on when there's no obvious solutions and more learning is needed. Sometimes they become topics at speaking events and panels that I've joined. But oftentimes they also become podcast topics. You know, being beyond just featuring guests and their perspectives on this show, we have a way to kind of anonymously feature the pain and highlight the corresponding winning tactics that we see every day to the benefit of you, our listener. And in that spirit, I've had something simmering for, honestly, nearly a year that I think we ought to be talking about, and that's the strategic planning process in agribusiness. There are some commonly recurring and, in my take, very troubling things that I see emerge time and time again. And I'm hoping that perhaps sharing some of those observations here in this venue can help others to identify where they maybe are stumbling into them, and maybe share some ideas about how to avoid or overcome the unproductive tensions that they cause and lackluster results that they can deliver. But rather than do a single exhaustive episode on this, which is usually my default setting, we're going to try something a little bit different. We're going to do a 3-part miniseries on the podcast. 3 weeks, 3 short episodes with 3 sets of observations and insights to help you improve how you effectively activate strategy in your agribusiness. Now, I recognize that many of you, as you hear this here in late in the year, might think, well, that would have been a lot better if it had been coming out 90 days ago or 180 days ago. And I agree, it would have been. But that's also the beauty of this medium. This content will still be posted and available online 9, 12, 24 months from now. And you can always come back and listen again when you're next in the process of what we conventionally call strategic planning. Nonetheless, I still encourage you to listen today. There's nothing that prevents you from maybe noticing something in this mini-series this week and the next 2 that might warrant your immediate attention in your own plan, or provide a chance to course correct a plan that you have in flight and get ahead of some of the pitfalls that might be waiting for you. So with that, here we go. Activating strategy, part 1. Planning isn't strategy. What I mean by that is, strategic planning is what we commonly know it, and I'll admit that I'm probably going to default to saying or sharing that term a lot in the next 3 episodes. Strategic planning is what we conventionally call it, but that is a branding or a misbranding nightmare. I think strategic planning is an oxymoron. I think it's a bit confusing. I think it's a bit lazy. And it's just kind of got that sort of mandatory offsite with lukewarm coffee and too many bowls of trail mix kind of energy, right? We all have been through strategic planning workshops and meetings. Well, maybe it was external facilitation, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it followed a process, maybe it didn't. Maybe it was largely rubber stamping something that had existed from the last cycle. Maybe it wasn't. But strategic planning is what we call it, and it's the name that we have. Why is this such an issue? Well, there's a few reasons for this. I really want to start this mini-series off with. The first is, what is strategy? We've talked about this a lot in the program, but let's spend a minute here. I don't want to get dogmatic. I don't want to get super stubborn here, but words matter. Strategy is the set of choices your agribusiness makes about where it wants to play, meaning the market it competes in, the segments that you're going to target, the products and services you're going to offer, the customers you want to serve, where you're going to play. And it also defines your value proposition, how you're going to differentiate, what capabilities you need to have in place, whether they're people or assets, technology, otherwise, all different ways that you're going to win. It's where to play, it's how to win, right? Not new ideas. But again, to summarize it, strategy articulates the vision and it sets the direction. At its most basic level, strategy is about choices and trade-offs and what you're trying to become. It's not a set of planning activities, right? It's bigger than that. It's bolder than that. It's more ambiguous. It creates more discomfort. Plans create comfort and predictability and control. Strategy creates vision and motivation that lacks sometimes some of those plans. And so I think that's what a first really important idea to have. So then you might be saying, okay, that's interesting. So what is strategic planning and what's wrong with that? The idea that we're actually pointing to here is when we say strategic planning, we're actually talking about strategy activation. It's the process and tools whereby you put your strategy into action. And because it's a force applied to strategy, it stands apart from strategy. Where strategy, defined where to play and how to win, the activation process is about road mapping the near-term future to set the goals that you want to accomplish, the targets you intend to hit, the initiatives you commit to pursue, which are aligned to your strategy and in service of the objectives that you've put forth. In part 3 of this miniseries, I intend to go through what components I believe are critical to an effective strategy activation plan. But it's kind of a preview. Here's a few of those things that you should expect to see in your plan. You should see a crisp summary articulation of the state of the company at a set point in the future. You should see the metrics and indicators that you will look to specifically determine whether or not you accomplish what you set out to. You'll have a defined short list of the most potent and impactful initiatives available to you to pursue, that'll help move the organization in the desired direction. Where strategy defines where you want to play and how you're going to win, the activation declares what you will do in the next period of time to execute. And so again, you might be saying, fine, Joe, you obviously feel this is really important, but it doesn't actually change anything for us. That's what our strategic plan is. So who cares? But I would argue that, again, these words matter, and it does, in fact, does change things for you.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
Strategic planning, when I see it in practice, is very hard to decouple from the minds of the people of the organizations from the strategy itself. They commingle. They get kind of all mixed up together, the strategy versus the strategic plan. What is it we're trying to accomplish versus how we're going to do it? And I don't know what the original sin is here, but the phrasing of strategic planning is what this, I think, is the lever for mixing them together that might be contributing to the confusion. The conflation of these ideas and the commingling of terms is problematic in a very real way. The first thing is, I think it betrays a lack of clarity from leadership on the difference between the two distinct pursuits of setting strategy and activating strategy. And this lack of clarity can create confusion that has real consequences. Deeper in your organization, you can start to confuse your strategy with tactics. When you confuse your strategy with tactics, it's going to narrow the scope of your imagination. Because tactics are things that you believe you can reasonably undertake and accomplish and do. You have a sense of how it would be done, where and when it would be done, who might do it. Strategy can't be bound by that. It has to be bigger. It's the activation process where we actually distill down what it is we're trying to create into how we're going to do it. So if you confuse your strategy with tactics, again, you're going to narrow the scope of your imagination. And if you confuse your tactics with strategy and vision, that's also a problem going in a direction. When your tactics don't work, you might, find yourself not changing course because you're like, well, this is our strategy. This is what we said we're going to do. And if it's not working, does that mean our strategy is wrong? We don't believe our strategy is wrong. We need to keep going. And so you don't change course. You're not willing to abandon it. And you keep doing things that are not helping you or that you're not good at. If you've actually decoupled strategy from activation, you can say, okay, the set of activities that we have undertaken, either we are not equipped to do them, we can't afford to do them, the market's not responding, we're doing them too early or incorrectly, whatever it is, this set of tactics are not working. We're going to try a different approach. But it doesn't imply that the underlying strategy is wrong or needs to be changed. You're saying there's something about the way that we're activating and executing is wrong. So you need to kind of have that distinction, that decoupling, to be able to be clear-eyed and see the difference between the two. Ultimately, it just becomes increasingly difficult if you commingle strategy and execution. It becomes increasingly difficult to dissect if you have the wrong strategy or the wrong course of action. How do you isolate where things are not working if you've actually commingled the two? How do you answer that question? So allow me for a moment just to share a couple of examples for how you can tell the difference in the wild between planning and strategy. Think about these items as you look at your strategy and at your strategic plan, I hate to use the term, and see how well they hold up. Look at the level of specificity. If it has choices and direction and competitive stance, it's strategy. If it has numbers, milestones, and owners, it's planning. If you don't see any cross-population, if they're entirely unique in your documentation and approach, that's great. If they're not entirely different, that points to perhaps some commingling I think could be problematic. Look at the time horizon. Strategies usually span somewhere to 3 to 10 years or even longer. Whereas a quote-unquote strategic plan would often focus on the next 1 to 3 years. You shouldn't see a lot of direct correlation between your strategy and your strategic plan. Not in the words, not in the time horizon, not in the level of specificity. It's also important to think about the nature of the work, right? Strategy is creative. It's analytical. It's decision-oriented. Where the planning process is it's process-driven, it's calendar-based, it's oriented towards coordination and resourcing and measurement. And then think about the outputs, right? The output of a strategy is a few bold choices. Strategic planning, conversely, is a long list of initiatives. Now, we're going to talk about this in later in the series. I don't think that list should be long, but it often is. Right, so the output of strategy is few bold choices. Output of strategic planning is a long list of initiatives. Some of these things might be the first time you've thought about, or first time in a long time you've thought about the distinctions, and that sort of points to where I think the stuff gets mingled together. We sometimes say, yes, I understand the difference between strategy and strategic planning, but we don't have necessarily these kinds of distinguishing aspects at top of mind where we can point to and kind of dissect whether or not something falls into bucket 1 or bucket 2. So if you pass all of these filters without issue, if the last 13 minutes, there's nothing that you can say, nothing that I've said that you said is okay, the problem is in our business. If that's the case, I congratulate you. And I'd like to have you on the show. This is an invitation because I'd love to hear from you how you develop that kind of clarity of thought and discipline in following good process. So reach out by LinkedIn, reach out by our website in the show notes, set up some time for us to talk, and I'd love to have you come on the program. For the rest of you, and this even goes for my own business, I'm guilty too, for the rest of you and rest of us, if this revealed some opportunities where maybe you have commingled, maybe you haven't properly differentiated, maybe your strategy isn't as long-term as you think it is, not as long-term as it should be, or your strategic planning is even longer than the strategy. Whatever the overlap or the conflict or the misalignment is, I strongly encourage you to tune in for parts 2 and 3 of this miniseries, as we're going to highlight a couple of more problems with the conventional strategic planning process that's used by many. And we're going to share ideas for a better approach that we've seen deliver real results within our client organizations that I think you guys could learn from and potentially adopt some or all in your own processes in your organizations. So I want to say thank you again for listening to the program today. This is something I think is very important. It's timely, as we're all looking at a very uncertain economic environment ahead, trying to anticipate the bottom of the agricultural cycle and what coming out of it looks like, the impact of new technologies, changing costs of capital, product patent cliffs. There's so many changes that are coming at us. Good strategy and really rigorous planning around activating that strategy as two separate but related efforts has never been more important. And so I think this is a really important thing for us to keep talking about. I never take the time that you spend listening to this podcast for granted, and I hope this was of value to you. As always, if it was, please consider sharing this with others who you think would find similar benefit from it for their agribusiness. I appreciate you being part of the Pacesetter Pod community. The fact that you take time to listen, to consider and action ways to improve strategy execution in support of growing your agribusiness. And I look forward to having you join us next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is the podcastfactory.com.